Human soldiers pushed. An orc woman, unaware that she was the most powerful person in the kingdom. The tavern smelled like three things: stale ale, unwashed soldiers, and the particular kind of tension that happens when people with swords have been drinking since noon. The Royal Griffin wasn't the kind of establishment where polite conversation happened. It was the kind where men with too much armor and too little sense gathered to remind themselves why they wore the armor in the first place. Eartha Blackfist pushed through the heavy oak door and immediately knew she'd made a mistake. Not the first mistake of her life. She'd made plenty of those over 43 years, but possibly the most inconvenient one of the week. Every head turned. Not because she was a woman. The tavern had 3 serving girls, and nobody paid them attention beyond ordering more drinks. Every head turned because Eartha was 7 feet of solid muscle with skin the color of spring leaves and tusks that curved up from her lower jaw like ivory warnings. She was an orc, and orcs didn't walk into human taverns in the capital city. Not unless they had a death wish or orders from someone important enough that death became negotiable. She had neither. She just wanted a drink. Well, well. The voice came from the corner table where 5 soldiers sat, their armor still bearing the dust of the morning patrol. The speaker was a captain. You could tell by the extra silver on his breastplate and the way he spoke like someone used to being obeyed. Looks like someone let the livestock wander in from the pens. Captain Percival Hawthorne. Eartha knew him by reputation. 20 years in the King's Guard, 17 battle commendations, 0 experience not being an absolute waste of good armor. He had the kind of face that suggested his mother had been disappointed from birth. Narrow, pinched, with eyes set too close together like they were trying to share secrets his brain didn't deserve to know. Eartha said nothing. She'd learned over the years that silence was a weapon sharper than most blades. She walked to the bar, her boots, custom made because orc feet didn't fit human sizes, leaving prints in the sawdust on the floor. "Hey, Greenskin." Hawthorne stood up. His chair scraped against the floor with the kind of sound that makes everyone in a room stop pretending they're not watching. "I asked you a question." "No," Eartha said quietly, not turning around. "You made a statement. A stupid one, but a statement nonetheless." The serving girl behind the bar, a thin woman with the exhausted look of someone who'd seen this scene play out too many times, froze with a tankard in her hand. Her eyes went wide. Not with shock, with recognition. And something that might have been hope if hope wasn't such a dangerous thing to feel in a room full of armed men who'd been drinking. "What did you just say?" Hawthorne's voice went up half an octave. That's what always happened with men like him. The moment their authority got questioned, their voices climbed like they were looking for backup in the higher registers. Eartha turned slowly, deliberate, the kind of movement that said she wasn't scared, wasn't running, and if this was about to become a problem, she wanted everyone to see exactly how it started. "I said," she repeated, each word clear and measured, "that you made a statement, not a question. If you're going to insult someone, Captain, at least have the intellectual consistency to know what grammatical form you're using." The tavern went quiet in the way rooms go quiet right before violence makes its entrance. Even the fireplace seemed to stop crackling. Somewhere in the back, a serving girl dropped a plate. The sound of it shattering felt like punctuation on a sentence nobody wanted to finish reading. Hawthorne's face did something complicated. It started at red, passed through crimson, and settled somewhere around the color of a brick that had been left in the sun too long. You dare speak to me like that?" "I dare lots of things, Captain." Eartha's voice remained level, almost bored. "I dare wake up in a kingdom that hates me. I dare walk streets where children throw stones and adults throw worse things. I dare serve a king who most of his subjects think is insane for keeping me around. So yes, I dare speak to you however I choose." 3 of Hawthorne's soldiers stood up, then a 4th, then the 5th. They formed a semicircle, hands on sword hilts, the universal signal for, "We're about to do something we'll either regret or brag about, depending on how it goes." "You need to leave," Hawthorne said. "Now, before this becomes what?" Eartha interrupted. "A scene? It's already a scene, Captain. 5 armed soldiers surrounding 1 unarmed woman. Very brave, very heroic. I'm sure the bards will sing songs about this moment for generations." That's when Sergeant Oswald Graves made his first mistake of many that day. He put his hand on Eartha's shoulder. Not gently, not like a request, like an order delivered through flesh and bone. "The captain gave you an order, Greenskin." Eartha looked down at the hand on her shoulder. Graves had a distinctive scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw, a souvenir from a battle against an orc raiding party 6 years ago. She knew because she'd read the report. She'd read every report of every skirmish between humans and orcs for the past 15 years. It was her job to know these things. "Remove your hand," she said quietly, "or lose the ability to use it for anything more complicated than scratching yourself." Graves laughed. His companions laughed. Hawthorne laughed. The serving girl didn't laugh. She was backing toward the kitchen door, her face pale, one hand over her mouth like she was trying to physically hold back words she knew would get her fired, or worse. "Big talk from livestock," Graves said, and then he pushed. Not hard. Just enough to make Eartha stumble back 2 steps. Just enough to establish dominance, to remind everyone in the room of the hierarchy, to make it clear that green skin meant less than no skin at all. Eartha caught herself, straightened, and did the last thing anyone expected. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just watched a man seal his own fate and found it mildly amusing in the way you might find a puppy amusing right before it pees on your expensive rug. "Captain Percival Hawthorne," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent tavern. "Sergeant Oswald Graves, Privates Marcus Flynn, Jonathan Reeves, and Damian Cortez. I want you all to remember this moment very clearly, because tomorrow morning, when you're standing in front of the king trying to explain yourselves, I want you to have accurate memories of exactly how monumentally stupid you were." Hawthorne's face twisted into something ugly. "The king? You think we're afraid of—" He didn't finish the sentence. Mostly because that's when he grabbed Eartha's arm and shoved her toward the door. Hard. The kind of shove that said this wasn't about escorting someone out anymore. This was about punishment. About showing the green-skinned thing what happened when it forgot its place. Eartha hit the doorframe, then the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She felt it happen, felt her lungs seize up for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Her armor pressed against her chest, the armor she wore under her civilian clothes, the armor nobody in the tavern had seen. Something fell from beneath her tunic, rolled across the floor, stopped at the feet of a small boy who'd been hiding under one of the tables, watching the entertainment with the wide-eyed fascination of children who didn't yet understand when adults were about to do something unforgivable. The boy picked it up, turned it over in his small hands. His voice, when it came, was loud in the silence. "Mama, why does the Green Lady have the King's Medal?" Time did something strange then. It didn't stop. That would have been too kind. Instead, it slowed down just enough for everyone to see exactly what had fallen. Just enough for the light from the fireplace to catch the gold. Just enough for someone to recognize the 3 stars engraved on one side and the royal seal engraved on the other. The Royal Medal of Valor. Given personally by King Roland Ashworth to only 17 people in the entire history of the kingdom. Given to warriors who'd saved not just battles, but entire wars. Given to heroes whose names got carved into stone and spoken in prayers. Eartha pushed herself up slowly. Her ribs hurt. Nothing broken, but bruised enough that she'd feel this tomorrow. She walked to the boy, knelt down despite the protest in her knees, and held out her hand. "May I have that back, please?" The boy gave her the medal. His hand was shaking. He was 5, maybe 6, young enough that fear hadn't learned to pretend to be anything else yet. "Thank you," Eartha said softly. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're very brave. Braver than some soldiers I could mention." She stood, turned, faced the 5 men who'd been laughing 30 seconds ago and now looked like they'd collectively swallowed something sharp and regretted it. "My name," she said, her voice clear and cold as winter water, "is Commander Eartha Blackfist, Chief Military Strategist to King Roland Ashworth, architect of the victory at Blackwater Pass that saved 6,000 soldiers, designer of the defensive iron bridge that held against the Northern Rebellion, negotiator of the Treaty of 3 Clans that ended the border wars and saved more lives than anyone in this room will ever count." She walked toward Hawthorne. He tried to stand his ground, failed, took 1 step back, then another. "I've served this kingdom for 15 years. I've bled for it more times than you've had hot meals. I've lost friends defending borders you take for granted. And I did it all while being called greenskin, monster, savage, beast, and every other creative insult the human vocabulary could invent." She stopped directly in front of him, looked down. Hawthorne was 6 feet tall and considered himself a large man. Eartha made him look small. "But here's the thing about that medal you just watched fall to the floor while you were busy reminding me of my place." She held it up between them. The gold caught the light. 3 stars. 1 for each time she'd saved the kingdom. "The king gave this to me personally, pinned it to my chest himself, looked me in the eye and called me the finest soldier he'd ever known. And he meant it. Silence. The kind that pressed against your eardrums. So when you see me tomorrow morning, and you will see me, Captain, because King Roland Ashworth is going to want a full report of this incident, I want you to remember that you didn't just push a random orc. You pushed the woman who saved your kingdom more times than you've saved yourself from your own stupidity. She turned to leave. Got 3 steps toward the door. Stopped. Oh, and Sergeant Graves? That scar on your face? Battle of Crimson Ridge 6 years ago. I know you got that fighting orc raiders. What you don't know is that I'm the one who sent the intelligence report that warned the kingdom about that raid 3 days before it happened. The report your commanding officer ignored. 47 soldiers died because of that decision. You got lucky. You only got the scar. She walked out. Behind her, in the silence she left, someone started crying. Not the boy, not the serving girl. One of the soldiers. The youngest one, Private Reeves, 21 years old, 3 months out of training, first posting in the capital city. He was crying because he'd just realized he'd stood in a tavern and watched his captain assault the woman who'd saved his older brother's life at Blackwater Pass. The door closed. The tavern stayed silent for another minute, then 2. Then someone finally moved, and the spell broke, and everyone started talking at once in the way people do when they've witnessed something that fundamentally changed their understanding of the world, and they needed to make noise to convince themselves reality still made sense. Outside, Eartha walked 3 blocks before she let herself lean against a wall. Her hands were shaking, not from fear. From rage so profound it didn't have room for expression. From humiliation so deep it had nowhere to go except inward. She'd spent 15 years earning respect, one decision at a time. One battle. One strategy, one treaty, building trust brick by brick in a kingdom that treated her like a useful monster at best, and an animal at worst. And it took 5 drunken soldiers 30 seconds to remind her that none of it mattered, that she'd always be green first, and everything else second. She touched the metal through her tunic, felt its weight, remembered the day the king had given it to her. The throne room had been empty except for the 2 of them. No ceremony, no public recognition. He'd apologized for that. Said his court wouldn't accept it. Said he had to protect her by keeping her achievements quiet. Protection. She'd laughed at the word then. She wasn't laughing now. Eartha pushed off the wall, started walking toward the palace. She had a meeting with the king in an hour anyway. Something about the eastern border and supply routes. Just another day of serving a kingdom that needed her brain but hated her existence. Tomorrow she'd deal with Captain Hawthorne and his merry band of idiots. Tonight she had work to do. Because that was the thing about being the most powerful person nobody believed in. You didn't stop working just because people reminded you of your place. You kept working in spite of it. And eventually, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually, they'd understand that the greatest threat to the kingdom wasn't the orc standing in front of them. It was losing her. King Roland Ashworth was 72 years old and tired of being 72 years old. His knees hurt. His back hurt. His head hurt from wearing a crown that felt heavier every year despite being made of the same gold and same jewels it had always been made of. Physics didn't care about metaphor, but his neck certainly did. He was also tired of his war council. Specifically, tired of watching them argue about the same things they'd argued about for the past decade while pretending these were new arguments that required fresh consideration. The eastern border is vulnerable, Lord Pemberton said. Again. Lord Pemberton said this at every meeting. The eastern border could be made of solid diamond, and Lord Pemberton would find a way to call it vulnerable. We need to station 3 additional regiments. We don't have 3 additional regiments, Lady Beatrice Winters interrupted. She was the king's senior advisor, and the only person in the room who Roland actually trusted to tell him the truth instead of what sounded good in court. We barely have the 2 regiments we already stationed there, unless you're suggesting we conjure soldiers out of... The door opened. Eartha walked in. She was late, which was unusual. Eartha was never late. She operated on a personal schedule that made the sun look imprecise. Roland noticed immediately that something was wrong, not just wrong. Disaster-shaped wrong. He'd known Eartha for 15 years. Could read her body language better than he could read his own son's. Right now she was walking like someone who'd decided not to kill anyone, but was keeping the option warm just in case. "Commander," he said carefully, "you're late. Apologies, Your Majesty." Her voice was flat, professional. The tone she used when she was a half-degree away from doing something that would require explanations. "I was delayed by a situation at the Royal Griffin Tavern." The War Council went quiet. You didn't mention taverns in strategic meetings unless something significant had happened there, like a fire, or a murder, Or both? What kind of situation? Roland asked. The kind where 5 of your soldiers decided that assault and public humiliation were appropriate responses to an orc requesting a drink. The temperature in the room dropped about 15 degrees. Roland set down the supply report he'd been pretending to read. Explain. Urtha did, calmly, methodically, like she was describing troop movements instead of describing being shoved to the ground by men who were supposed to protect the kingdom she helped defend. By the time she finished, Lord Pemberton looked like he'd swallowed a live eel. Lady Beatrice had her hand over her mouth. 3 other council members were suddenly very interested in the table in front of them. Roland stood up. When the King of Aldermore stood up during a meeting, it meant someone was about to have a very bad day. You're telling me, he said slowly, that Captain Percival Hawthorne, a man I promoted to the King's Guard 3 years ago, physically assaulted my chief military strategist. In public. In front of witnesses. Yes, Your Majesty. And that Sergeant Oswald Graves and 3 privates stood by and participated. Yes, Your Majesty. And that none of them recognized you. In their defense, Urtha said dryly, I wasn't wearing my armor, and apparently all orcs look alike to some people. That's not a defense, Roland snapped. That's evidence of exactly why this happened. He started pacing. Roland only paced when he was too angry to stand still. His advisors knew this. Started looking nervous. 15 years, Roland said. 15 years you've served this kingdom, saved thousands of lives, won battles that kept my crown on my head and my people safe. And 5 idiots in a tavern treat you like... He couldn't finish. The words were too ugly. Like an orc, Your Majesty. Urtha finished quietly. They treated me like an orc, which I am. You're a hero, Roland corrected sharply. You're a soldier. You're the finest strategic mind this kingdom has produced in 3 generations. Your species doesn't change that. With respect, Urtha said, and Roland could hear the exhaustion in her voice. My species is the only thing most of your subjects see. The rest doesn't matter if they don't look past the green. Lady Beatrice spoke up for the first time. What do you want to do about this, Your Majesty? What did he want to do? Roland wanted to strip Hawthorne of his rank and throw him in a cell. Wanted to drag all 5 soldiers in front of the court and make an example that would be remembered for decades. Wanted to make it crystal clear that anyone who touched Urtha answered to him personally. But he'd been king for 43 years. Long enough to know that wanting something and doing something were separated by the complicated reality of politics, public opinion, and the fact that most of his subjects agreed with Hawthorne more than they disagreed with him. If he punished the soldiers too severely, half the military would see it as the king choosing an orc over humans. Discontent would spread. Rumors would start. The peace Urtha had helped build would crack. If he didn't punish them at all, Urtha would leave. And losing Urtha would cost him more than a dozen rebellions. I want them stripped of duty pending investigation, Roland said finally. Confined to barracks. And I want Hawthorne in my throne room tomorrow morning to explain himself. Your Majesty. Lord Pemberton interjected nervously. Perhaps we should consider, Consider what? Roland's voice could have frozen fire. Consider that maybe assaulting my chief strategist should be overlooked. Consider that perhaps we should sympathize with soldiers who can't tell the difference between a warrior and a random orc because they're too stupid to look at the person instead of the skin color. Pemberton shut up. Smart man. Roland turned to Urtha. She'd been standing at attention this whole time, rigid, professional, showing nothing. But he could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands were clenched just slightly too tight, the careful distance she'd put between herself and everyone else in the room. I'm sorry this happened, he said quietly, meaning it. Urtha met his eyes. You apologize to me more than you apologize to your own wife, Your Majesty. That's because my wife doesn't get assaulted by my soldiers. Perhaps she should. Then she'd understand what I deal with. It was a joke, barely. The kind of humor that came from a place of pain too deep to acknowledge directly. Roland didn't laugh. Neither did anyone else. I'll handle this, he promised. Hawthorne will answer for what he did. Urtha nodded once. Then, if that's all, Your Majesty, I have troop movements to review. That's all. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. Lady Beatrice waited exactly 30 seconds before speaking. You know the court is going to lose their minds when they find out. The court can lose whatever they want, Roland said tiredly. I'm more concerned about losing Urtha. You think she'd leave? Roland sat back down, felt his age in every joint. If I were her, I would have left years ago. The fact that she hasn't means she has more patience than I deserve and more loyalty than this kingdom has earned. So what do we do? We make it right. Roland looked around the table at his advisors, men and women who'd served him for years. Good people, mostly. And we start acknowledging publicly what we all know privately. Eartha Blackfist isn't just valuable because she's smart. She's irreplaceable because she's the only one who can do what she does. And if we lose her, we lose the next war before it starts. The nobles won't like that, Lord Pemberton said carefully. The nobles don't have to like it, Roland said. They just have to live with it. Because here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Hawthorne is going to stand in my throne room in front of the entire court. He's going to confess to what he did, and I'm going to make it very clear what happens when someone in my service forgets that honor isn't determined by the color of your skin. Lady Beatrice smiled slightly. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for years. Should I inform the court that attendance is mandatory? Please do. And make sure Eartha is there. She deserves to watch this. After they left, Roland sat alone in the empty council chamber. The candles were burning low. His tea had gone cold. Somewhere in the palace, musicians were playing for a banquet he was supposed to attend. He ignored them all. Instead, he thought about a morning 15 years ago when a young orc woman had walked into his throne room and offered her services to a kingdom that hated her. She'd been 28 years old. Brilliant. Desperate. Her clan had been destroyed in the border wars. She had nowhere else to go. He'd hired her because he was curious, kept her because she was exceptional, defended her because it was right. But he'd never given her what she actually deserved, the same respect his subjects gave any human in her position. Tomorrow that was going to change, even if it cost him half his court. Eartha's quarters in the palace were small, not because the king wanted them small, he'd offered her twice the space, but because she'd requested small. Large rooms felt exposed, vulnerable, like someone could attack from too many angles at once. Orc paranoia, she'd joked once. The king hadn't laughed, probably because he knew it wasn't really paranoia when people actually wanted you dead. She sat on her bed, custom-made, reinforced, because orc weight distribution made human furniture questionable at best, and held the Royal Medal of Valor in both hands. 3 stars, each one representing a battle that had changed the course of the kingdom. Each one earned with blood, strategy, and the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than just physical tiredness. The Battle of Blackwater Pass. She'd been 31. The northern armies had trapped 6,000 soldiers in a valley with no escape routes. Everyone had expected a massacre. She'd studied the terrain for 3 days straight without sleeping, found a series of caves that old maps said didn't exist, and evacuated the entire army through underground tunnels while using a skeleton crew to make it look like the full force was still defending the pass. 0 casualties, 6,000 lives saved. The northern armies attacked an empty valley and got ambushed by the evacuated forces 2 days later. The king had called it brilliant. The military historians called it unprecedented. The soldiers whose lives she'd saved called it a miracle. The court called it luck and questioned whether an orc should be given credit for human survival. Ironbridge. She'd been 36. A rebellion that should have taken the city in 3 days got held off for 2 months because she'd redesigned the entire defense system overnight. Rotating guards, supply chains that couldn't be cut, escape routes for civilians, and a psychological warfare campaign that made the rebels think they were facing an army 3 times the actual size. The rebellion collapsed from internal confusion before ever breaking the city walls. The king gave her the 2nd star. The court called it excessive. The Treaty of 3 Clans. 2 years ago, the orc clans on the eastern border had been raiding human settlements. The human villages had been retaliating. 15 years of back-and-forth violence that was threatening to explode into full war. She'd gone alone into orc territory, met with 3 chieftains who'd never trusted a human and barely trusted orcs who served humans, spoke to them in Old Orcish, a language most humans didn't know existed, negotiated a treaty that gave both sides what they needed without anyone losing face. Peace. Actual, lasting peace that had held for 2 years and showed no signs of breaking. The 3rd star. The king had pinned it on her chest personally, told her she was the finest soldier he'd ever known. Meant it. The court hadn't said anything, mostly because they'd been too shocked that he'd given a 3rd medal to an orc to formulate coherent objections. 3 stars. 15 years of service. Thousands of lives saved. And 5 drunk soldiers still shoved her to the ground because her skin was green. A knock on her door. "Come in," she called. Lady Beatrice entered. She was carrying a tray with tea and some kind of pastry that smelled like cinnamon and apologies. "The king wanted me to check on you." "I'm fine." "That's what I told him you'd say." Beatrice set the tray down on the small table by the window. "Which is why he told me to bring tea and stay until you admitted you're not actually fine." Despite everything, Eartha almost smiled. "How long have you been practicing that speech?" "About 3 hours. The king is very specific about wording." Beatrice sat down in the only chair in the room, also custom-made, also reinforced. "He's furious, you know." "I know. Not just furious. The kind of furious that involves rethinking his entire approach to how this kingdom treats you." Eartha looked up at that. "What does that mean?" "It means tomorrow morning's throne room session is going to be interesting. Mandatory attendance for the entire court. The king wants witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" "To Captain Hawthorne explaining why he assaulted the woman who saved the kingdom 3 times. Beatrice paused. "The king is done being subtle about your value." Eartha set the medal down carefully. "That's going to cause problems." "Probably, but he's decided he's more afraid of losing you than he is of court politics." Beatrice leaned forward. "The real question is whether you still want to be here." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because 15 years of service got you shoved to the ground in a tavern by men who'll never see you as anything except a greenskin. Because even if Hawthorne gets punished, there are 1,000 more just like him. Because you've proven everything you possibly could, and it still isn't enough for most people. Are you trying to convince me to leave?" "I'm trying to make sure you're staying for the right reasons." Beatrice's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't owe this kingdom your entire life, Eartha. You've already given more than anyone had the right to expect." Eartha was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I got a letter from my brother yesterday." "Bargoth? He's the only brother I have, so yes." Eartha pulled out the letter from a drawer. The handwriting was terrible. Bargoth had learned to write specifically so he could stay in touch with her. But he'd learned late, and it showed. "He wants me to come home. Says the clans are doing better. Says there's room for me there now. Says I've proven my point and it's time to stop trying to earn respect from people who'll never give it." "Is he right?" "Probably." Eartha refolded the letter. "The smart move is to leave. Go back to my people. Find a clan that will value what I can do without making it contingent on me being something I'm not. But I remember what this kingdom was like 15 years ago. The border wars. The rebellions. The constant fear that everything was going to collapse into chaos. And I look at it now. Not perfect. Not even close. But stable. Peaceful. Growing." She touched the medal again. "I helped build that. Me. An orc that half the kingdom thinks shouldn't exist and the other half thinks is some kind of useful monster. I built something here. And leaving would mean watching it potentially fall apart because someone else didn't understand the factors that are keeping it together. That's not your responsibility, isn't it?" Eartha looked at Beatrice. "If I have the knowledge to prevent suffering and I choose not to use it, doesn't that make me complicit in that suffering? That's an impossible standard." "Yes. But impossible standards are what make you a commander instead of just a soldier." Eartha stood up, walked to the window. Her quarters overlooked the eastern courtyard. She could see guards walking their routes, see servants carrying supplies, see normal life happening in a kingdom that had been anything but normal not long ago. "I'll stay," she said finally. "At least for now. But not because I owe this kingdom anything. I'll stay because there are people here who deserve better than what they'd get if I left. The soldiers who listened to my strategies and lived. The families who don't have to bury children because borders are peaceful. The orc clans who have a treaty they can trust because I negotiated it." She turned back to Beatrice. "But I won't stay if nothing changes. If tomorrow the king punishes Hawthorne and then everything goes back to how it was, me valuable but hidden, respected but never honored, trusted but never truly believed, then I'm done. Bargoth is right. There's a point where proving yourself stops being noble and starts being self-destruction." Beatrice nodded slowly. "I'll tell the king. Don't bother. He already knows. That's why tomorrow is happening." After Beatrice left, Eartha stood at the window for another hour. Watched the sunset paint the kingdom in gold and orange and red. Beautiful colors for a beautiful place that didn't love her back. Somewhere in the barracks, 5 soldiers were probably realizing just how badly they'd miscalculated. Somewhere in his private chambers, the king was probably planning exactly what he'd say tomorrow. Somewhere in the court, nobles were probably already sharpening their opinions about why an orc getting assaulted wasn't really that significant. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow would tell her whether she'd wasted 15 years or built something worth the cost. Tomorrow the kingdom would have to choose. Not between humans and orcs. That was too simple. They'd have to choose between the comfortable prejudice they'd always known and the uncomfortable reality that their salvation had green skin and tusks. Eartha had a guess which way they'd choose. But she'd been wrong before. and hope, despite being stupid and probably pointless, kept showing up anyway. She touched the medal one more time. 3 stars. 3 chances the kingdom had been given to die. 3 times she'd saved it. Tomorrow, she'd find out if they deserved a 4th. The throne room at dawn was a specific kind of beautiful. Light came through the high windows at angles that made the ancient stones look almost ethereal, dust motes drifting like tiny spirits. Everything quiet before the chaos of court politics began. Captain Percival Hawthorne wasn't appreciating the beauty, mostly because he was too busy appreciating the magnitude of exactly how destroyed his career was about to become. He stood in the center of the room, still in full armor but without weapons. Those had been confiscated when he'd been dragged from the barracks at midnight, and informed that the king wanted him in the throne room at dawn. Full court attendance mandatory. Prepare to explain yourself. Sergeant Oswald Graves stood next to him. Then Privates Flynn, Reeves, and Cortez, all 5 of them. All looking like men who'd collectively realized they'd made a mistake that was about to be measured in units of the rest of your life. The court filed in slowly. Nobles in formal dress, advisors looking grave, military officers who wouldn't meet Hawthorne's eyes. He'd served with some of them, trained with others. Now they were looking at him like he was a stranger. Lady Beatrice Winters entered and took her position near the throne. Lord Pemberton followed. The full war council, everyone who mattered in the kingdom's decision-making. Then King Roland Ashworth walked in, 72 years old and somehow looking taller than he had any right to be. The crown sat on his head like it had been grown there. His formal robes, red and gold, the traditional colors of Aldermore, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He sat on the throne. The room went completely silent. Captain Percival Hawthorne. The king's voice carried to every corner. You've been summoned to explain an incident that occurred yesterday at the Royal Griffin Tavern. Please, enlighten the court. Hawthorne swallowed. His throat was dry. Every word he'd practiced in his cell last night evaporated like morning fog. Your Majesty, Let me help you. The king's voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. You assaulted an unarmed woman in a public establishment. You shoved her to the ground. You did this in front of witnesses, including a child. Does that sound accurate? The woman was an orc, Your Majesty. I didn't realize... Didn't realize what? Roland interrupted. Didn't realize that orcs have the same rights as any subject in my kingdom? Didn't realize that assault is assault regardless of the victim's species? Or didn't realize that the particular orc you assaulted happens to be the chief military strategist responsible for keeping you and thousands of other soldiers alive? The silence got heavier. I didn't recognize her, Hawthorne said desperately. She wasn't wearing her armor or rank. So your defense is that you only assault orcs when you can't identify their status? The king leaned forward. Tell me, Captain, at what rank does an orc become worthy of basic respect? Commander? General? Or does the green skin always override the uniform? Hawthorne's face went red. I meant no disrespect to the crown, Your Majesty. But you meant disrespect to Commander Blackfist. She's an orc. The words came out before Hawthorne could stop them. 3 syllables that summarized everything he actually believed. Everything he'd been trained to think. Everything the kingdom had always quietly agreed with. She's an orc. As if that explained everything. As if that justified anything. The king stood up. When King Roland stood during a formal court session, it meant someone's life was about to change trajectory. You're right, he said softly. Commander Eartha Blackfist is an orc, and I'm going to explain to you and every person in this room exactly what that means. He gestured. A side door opened. Eartha walked in. She was wearing full military dress armor, not the hidden protection she wore under civilian clothes. This was the formal armor reserved for ceremonies and official functions. Green-tinted steel polished to mirror brightness. The Royal Medal of Valor prominent on her chest. 3 stars catching the morning light. She looked like what she was, a warrior who'd earned every single honor she wore. The court's reaction was immediate. Whispers, gasps. A few nobles who'd never seen her in formal armor before looked genuinely shocked. Orcs weren't supposed to look noble, weren't supposed to command presence, weren't supposed to stand in throne rooms like they belonged there. Eartha stopped 3 paces from Hawthorne, looked down at him, said nothing. The king continued. Captain, meet Commander Blackfist. You may remember her from yesterday when you questioned her right to exist in a tavern. Let me introduce her properly. He began pacing. Roland only paced during the most significant pronouncements. 15 years ago, Eartha Blackfist offered her services to this kingdom. She was a refugee from the border wars. Her clan had been destroyed. She had nothing except knowledge and a willingness to serve. I hired her because I was curious. I kept her because within 3 months she'd reorganized our supply lines and reduced waste by 30%. Lord Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. He'd opposed that reorganization at the time. At 31, she designed the evacuation strategy that saved 6,000 soldiers at Blackwater Pass. The military historians still study that maneuver. They call it the most brilliant tactical retreat in Kingdom history. I call it the reason 6,000 families didn't lose fathers, sons, and brothers that year. Roland stopped pacing, turned to face the court directly. At 36, she single-handedly redesigned the defenses at Iron Bridge and held off a rebellion that should have taken the city in days. She held it for 2 months. 0 civilian casualties. Minimal military losses. The rebellion collapsed from internal confusion because they couldn't understand how they were losing to an army they should have crushed. He gestured to Eartha. 2 years ago, Commander Blackfist negotiated the Treaty of 3 Clans. Alone, unarmed. She walked into Orc territory and convinced 3 chieftains who'd been enemies for generations to agree to peace. That treaty has held. Not one raid. Not one retaliation. Complete peace on the eastern border for the first time in 15 years. Roland's voice got harder. 3 stars. 3 times this kingdom was going to bleed, suffer, and potentially fall. 3 times Commander Blackfist prevented it. And yesterday, 5 soldiers decided that none of that mattered because she has green skin. He walked to Hawthorne, stood directly in front of him. So let me be absolutely clear. Commander Blackfist isn't valuable to this kingdom despite being an orc. Her perspective as an orc, her understanding of orc culture, her ability to negotiate with orc clans, her experience with prejudice that made her more strategic than most human commanders, is exactly why she's irreplaceable. Roland's voice dropped to something dangerous. And you shoved her to the ground like she was livestock. Your Majesty, I'm not finished. The king's voice cut like a blade. Do you know what the definition of treason is, Captain? Hawthorne went pale. Treason was a hanging offense. Treason is betraying the kingdom's interests. Treason is acting against the crown's authority. And yesterday, you assaulted my chief military strategist. You humiliated the woman responsible for this kingdom's security. You did it publicly. You did it deliberately. And you did it because you decided that your prejudice was more important than the kingdom's welfare. Roland let that hang in the air for a long moment. I could hang you for this, he said quietly. I could make you an example that would be remembered for generations. Part of me wants to. Hawthorne was shaking now, visibly. But Commander Blackfist has advised me against it. Roland glanced at Eartha. She said that hanging you would make you a martyr to people who agree with your views, that it would create more problems than it solved. She's right. She's usually right. That's why I keep her. He stepped back. So instead, here's what's going to happen. You are stripped of rank, effective immediately. You will never serve in the military again, not in this kingdom, not anywhere I have influence. Your career is over. Hawthorne's face crumpled. Sergeant Graves, same sentence. Privates Flynn, Cortez, and Reeves, you're demoted and reassigned to border posts where you'll have time to think about what you witnessed and chose not to stop. Roland turned to address the full court. And for everyone else in this room, let me make something crystal clear. Commander Blackfist serves at my pleasure. She has my complete trust. She has earned every honor she wears. And anyone who questions her authority, her value, or her right to serve this kingdom will answer to me personally. He sat back down on the throne. Lady Winters, make sure this judgment is posted in every military barracks in the kingdom. I want every soldier to know exactly what happens when they confuse prejudice with duty. Yes, Your Majesty. Commander Blackfist. Roland's voice softened slightly. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Eartha had been standing silent this entire time. Now she looked at Hawthorne, really looked at him. Saw a man who'd just lost everything because of 30 seconds of stupidity. No, Your Majesty, she said quietly. I think you've made the point adequately. Then this matter is closed. Court dismissed. People filed out slowly, whispering, processing. Hawthorne was escorted away by guards, no longer a captain, just another soldier who'd made a catastrophic mistake. Eartha started to leave. Roland's voice stopped her. Commander, a moment. She turned. The throne room was nearly empty now. Just the king, Lady Beatrice, and 2 guards by the door. That was more public than we'd discussed, Eartha said. It needed to be. Roland walked down from the throne platform. Without the formal setting, he was just a tired old man with too much responsibility. I've been protecting you by keeping you quiet for 15 years. I thought it was kindness. Turns out it was cowardice. Your Majesty, let me finish. He held up a hand. I've let this kingdom treat you like a useful secret because I was afraid of what would happen if I forced them to acknowledge you properly. But yesterday proved that keeping you hidden doesn't actually protect you. It just gives people like Hawthorne permission to pretend you don't matter. He pulled something from his robes, another medal. This one was larger than the 3 stars. It was the Royal Seal of Service, the highest honor the kingdom could bestow. It was given to advisors, generals, and officials whose contributions fundamentally shaped the kingdom's future. Only 32 people in the kingdom's entire history had received it. None of them had been non-human. Kneel, Roland said. Bertha stared at the medal, then at the king. Your Majesty, you don't have to. I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing it because I should have done it years ago. His voice was firm. Kneel, Commander. She knelt. The stones were cold under her knee. Roland placed the medal around her neck. It was heavy, heavier than the other 3 combined. Not because of the medal, because of what it meant. By the authority vested in me as King of Aldermore, I name you Royal Advisor of Military Affairs. Your counsel is no longer a courtesy I extend. It's a requirement of my office. You will attend all war councils. Your strategies will be implemented. Your voice will be heard. And anyone who disrespects that voice disrespects my crown. He stepped back. Rise, Royal Advisor Blackfist. Bertha stood. The medal caught the light. She could feel its weight against her chest, could feel 15 years of quiet service suddenly becoming very loud visibility. The court is going to lose their minds, she said. Let them. They've had 15 years to figure out that you're essential. If they haven't learned by now, maybe loud is what they need. Roland smiled slightly. Besides, I'm 72. I don't have time for subtle anymore. Lady Beatrice approached, looking pleased with herself. I've already drafted the formal announcement. It'll be posted throughout the kingdom by sunset. Bertha touched the new medal. 4 honors now. 3 for battles saved. 1 for a career recognized. This makes me a target, Your Majesty. You've been a target for 15 years. Now you're a target with official protection and the authority to do something about it. Roland's expression sobered. I can't change how every person in this kingdom sees you, Bertha. But I can change how they're required to treat you. And that's a start. After they left, Bertha stood alone in the throne room. The morning light had shifted. It was nearly midday now. Outside, the kingdom was continuing. Markets opening, guards changing shifts, life happening in all the ordinary ways life happened when kingdoms weren't collapsing. She thought about Bargoth's letter, his offer to come home, his certainty that she'd proven her point and it was time to stop fighting. Maybe he was right, but maybe proving a point and building something permanent were 2 different goals. Maybe 15 years of quiet competence had laid groundwork that could finally become something more. Or maybe she was just making excuses for why she couldn't let go of a kingdom that had taken everything from her and given back just enough to keep her hoping. She touched all 4 medals. Each one a piece of history. Each one bought with blood and brilliance and the kind of patience that felt less like virtue and more like self-sacrifice. Tomorrow the announcements would go out. Tomorrow every soldier in the kingdom would know that an orc had been named Royal Advisor. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But today, just for today, she let herself feel something that had been absent for too long. Pride. Not the arrogant kind. Not the kind that came from defeating enemies or winning battles. The quiet kind that came from knowing you'd built something that would outlast you. The kind that said, I mattered, not just as a useful tool. As a person whose contributions were recognized, honored, and made permanent. 4 medals. 15 years of service. 1 kingdom that finally admitted it needed her. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where prejudice disappeared and everyone learned to love orcs. Most people would still see her green skin first and everything else second, but now they'd have to respect it. Not because they wanted to, because the king had made it mandatory. Progress. Slow, imperfect, frustrating progress that came in inches instead of miles. But progress nonetheless. Bertha walked out of the throne room into sunlight. The guards at the door saluted. One of them, a young soldier she didn't recognize, held the door open and said, Morning, Royal Advisor. Royal Advisor. The title felt strange, heavy, like armor that hadn't been broken in yet. She nodded to the guard, kept walking. She had work to do. The eastern border still needed attention. Supply routes still needed optimization. The treaty with the orc clans still required maintenance. Being recognized didn't mean stopping. It just meant the work would be slightly easier now, slightly less lonely, slightly more likely to actually change things instead of just maintaining them. She passed a group of nobles in the hallway. They saw her, saw the new medal. Their expressions went through complicated gymnastics: shock, recognition, calculation, reluctant acceptance. One of them, a lord she'd seen in war councils but never spoken to directly, bowed slightly. Royal advisor. It wasn't much, but it was something. A seed planted, water on stone, change happening in increments too small to see but too persistent to ignore. Bertha kept walking. She had meetings, strategies to review, a kingdom to help protect. And now, finally, she had the title to match the work she'd been doing all along. Green skin, 4 medals, 15 years of service, the most powerful person in the kingdom that nobody had believed in. Until now. If this story challenged how you see strength and sacrifice, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe power is earned through actions, not assumptions. And share this with someone who needs to remember that the most dangerous warriors are the ones you underestimate. In a kingdom built on assumptions, one woman proved that true power doesn't ask for permission. It earns respect, one battle at a time. Blood doesn't define loyalty, actions do. And in the end, the bravest choice isn't fighting for those who see you. It's serving those who refuse to, until they have no choice but to look.